Hi, I'm Mitch Gallagher. Welcome to Sweetwater's Guitars and Gear. We're in the studio with a special guest today. This is Marcus King. Great to see you.
Good to see you, Mitch.
Thanks for coming in. I know you've been out on the road for a while.
Absolutely, man. Yeah, we've been going pretty hard, but it's great to be here.
Yeah, you have a gig in Fort Wayne tonight.
Yeah, we sure do.
Right on. And it looked like from your schedule that you're out through pretty much the end of the year all over the world touring.
Yeah, man. We don't take much time to rest.
Right.
But we're really excited about this new project and ready to get it on the road.
Right. Well, tell us about the new project.
So we just finished recording it in Nashville, Tennessee, with Dave Cobb at old Studio A down there, and it's a record. It's called Carolina Confessions.
Okay.
And it's a record that I wrote over this past year or so, and it'll be out in September on Fantasy Records.
Okay. So you're following up, then the last was Due North, which was an EP that you put out last October or so.
Yeah.
And this will be a full-length record then coming out this fall?
Yes, sure it will.
Oh, right on. That's great. Look forward to that. So interesting looking back on your history. You're a third-generation guitar player, aren't you?
Yeah, I sure am. My grandfather played, and my dad still plays.
Right.
And my great-grandfather played the fiddle. I was surrounded by it growing up, so it was a really good way to grow up.
Right. And was the main thrust of all the family music, was it in the blues direction?
Well, no, it was more around folk, country, gospel,
Right.
old hymns and stuff. That's what was going on up in Blue Ridge, where a lot of my family's from.
Right.
And my father was a rock and roller his whole life.
Mm-hmm.
So I had a lot of different influences coming at me.
Right. And you started really young.
I sure did, yeah.
About 8 years old or so when you started
Since I can remember, I was
playing
banging
seriously?
around on something.
Yeah. And I saw something where you recorded your first tracks at like age 11 or something like that with your father's band.
Yeah, that was my first time in the studio
Yeah.
with my father's group.
Yeah, it had to be crazy going in that young and laying down tracks.
It was wild.
Yeah.
But I was glad to have that experience at that age.
Right. Right. So it interested me, and as I listened to your playing, you took a couple of years and pretty intensely studied jazz and have incorporated that into what you're doing. Tell us a little bit about what you bring, or what that brings to your playing, or how that influences what you do.
Well, it gives us a little bit more of a vocabulary to how we're playing, I was really blessed to have the opportunity to work with my instructor, Steve Watson, at the Fine Arts Center. And that was a really great experience overall, just giving me a real hunger to learn,
right,
and be in an environment where I was being educated every day, and really into it too. And that's added another depth, another layer to our music, I guess. And when people ask me about the psychedelic part that we mention in our description, I think it's more based off of our psychedelic jazz that we're all into.
Okay.
All the acid jazz stuff. That's been a big influence on all of us, individually and collectively.
Right.
So we like incorporating that part,
Mm-hmm.
kind of ego death, let your mind be free, a little stuff like that.
Right. That's awesome. So what I hear it ringing is beyond, if you will, the standard blues scale that many players would default to when they're playing. It seems to me that you're hitting a few more of the chord tones, well, a lot more of the chord tones as you're playing, more like a jazz player would in some of your solos when you're extending that harmony a little bit, as well as adding some chromaticism. Did it also affect your phrasing, or how do you make those note choices?
I don't know. It's a stream of consciousness kind of thing, really. I just like to express myself and whatever emotion I'm feeling, and try to bring myself back to the emotion I was when I wrote the song.
Right.
Nothing's really premeditated as far as what I'm playing, except for what key we're in and how I want to approach it initially. So as far as my note choices are concerned, it's really, if I'm angry, there may be a little bit more of a chromatic approach, which I guess some people will call out. But to me, it's just a release of energy.
Right. Sure. It's speaking of energy, one of the things that it appears to me that drives your playing is your right hand pick attack. You have you really strike the strings, especially with downstrokes, and then you kind of alternate that with a lighter upstroke. Are you looking for that to add dynamics and shaping to your phrases, or is it just something that you naturally feel, or where does that come from?
I don't know. My dad always got onto me when he was teaching me when I was younger, because I always did like mostly downstrokes, and I never really saw what the problem was. And I guess I haven't gotten much better at it.
Well, you have a distinctive way of you really snap through. I guess that's the way that I would put it. Almost like a classical player would call it a rest stroke, but you kind of snap through the notes, which really gives you a bell-like tone in the attack, especially when you're on the neck pickup of your guitar. It's a really interesting.
Well, thanks.
Interesting sound. Yeah,
Thanks
yeah. I noticed also that with your left hand, you primarily are playing with 3 fingers. You drop your little finger in occasionally.
Yeah.
Is that intentional? Is it because of the shapes you're playing, or where does that come from?
I never used my pinky for some reason.
Yeah.
And I have to in some things that I write, but
Right.
I find myself, if I start thinking about it, then I start to psych myself out.
Right.
I think there's something wrong with me
Right.
that I'm not using my pinky, but, if I'm playing what I need to be playing. And people ask me about that a lot. It's just kind of a knee-jerk reaction that my pinky stays out. I guess it's a classy thing.
Yeah, right. There you go. There you go. Sometimes when I ask players these kind of questions in interviews, they get real self-conscious, and the next time they're playing, they're thinking about it. So I don't want to.
I'm always
throw you
thinking
off,
about my pinky.
That's awesome. Your left hand also, you tend to play with your thumb behind the neck much more than a lot of blues players or rock players who wrap their thumb over. Now you do that, but a lot of the time you've got your thumb down. Is that to extend your reach, or why do you place your thumb that way?
Yeah, a little bit. I like thin guitar necks, and I like really small frets, and I've always kind of had this approach to it. And my dad always taught me with more of this thumb over approach.
Right.
But I kind of did it the other way.
Sure. Well, it seems like it does, especially with 3 fingers, give you a wider reach when you get across the fingerboard a little bit farther.
Yeah.
That way. So obviously it works. So you mentioned writing a few times there. Tell us a little bit about your approach to writing a song. Do you start with chords? Do you start with a melody? Do you start with lyrics? Where do they come from?
It's a little all over the place. I think the greatest thing for me as a writer is having a mobile phone to record ideas in.
Right.
And the funniest part about it is trying to figure out what the heck I was talking about when I go back to listen to it. Because it could just be nonsense. But sometimes I'll put down some ideas that I end up using. And it could just be a melody getting stuck in my head. And recording that, and then I go home. It's really a matter of just all these different ideas that I kind of come up with on the road. I don't have a place to really sit down and write because, we talked before about just staying busy and not really a lot of time to rest.
Right,
so,
right.
When I finally get home and I have a week off or so, I'm able to sit down with this material and start to piece things together. And then other times I sit down and it just kind of rolls right out. And I think that comes a lot from like a manic place in my mind, which is like a manic depressive state. And sometimes I can write really easily through that.
Interesting. So how do you take those songs then, once you've kind of sorted through everything and you've had a chance to sit down with it, how do you take those songs to the band then? Do you present them with charts, or how do you work up the arrangements?
It's a little loose as far as that, because I like them to add their own thing to it.
Right.
Because that's always been the first thing, is that it's a group effort, and I'm the primary songwriter. So a lot of my songs come out like just singer-songwriter things, just acoustic and vocal. And I think this record that we just did is actually was kind of a test for us, because it was all songs like that I hadn't presented to any of them because I thought they were just going to be acoustic tunes, And when I got him to Dave Cobb, he was really good about bringing the band in and making or helping us write these arrangements to incorporate the group. Because sometimes, horns just don't work on a track.
Right.
But if you could do it right, then it comes out.
The horns would be the one aspect that I would think is tough to just say, okay, everybody just play what you want to play, because you have 2 horn players,
right?
And they're most of the time are playing pretty set lines, aside from when they're soloing or something. Do you arrange those horns? Do they do it themselves, or do you have someone arrange them for you?
It's a collaborative effort, but I mean, they're certainly, behind the wheel as far as that goes. They write some really tasteful stuff, and I'll send a note their way every now and then, and the rest of the band will as well.
Mm-hmm.
But it's their lines, man. It's their thing, and I have usually a pretty good idea of what I'm looking for,
Mm-hmm.
and what I wrote, bass and drums and everything. But they really add their own flair to it.
Right, right. So it's interesting to look back over your career. You've been, it seems like an overnight sensation, but you've actually been doing this for a while. Tell us a little bit about what goes into building a band these days, because it's a very different world than it was 10, 20, 30 years ago.
Yeah, well, I think one thing that's kind of remained the same since when my dad was doing it in the 60s and 70s is a lot of poaching and stealing.
Yeah.
Which I hate to put it that way, but that's kind of how it happens. You got to go out and hunt, and you just find these players, and it worked out so organically with the guys that I'm playing with. I think it's almost 6 years ago I met Jack, my drummer, and around that same time I was playing with our trumpet player, Justin Johnson.
Mm-hmm.
And then from that it kind of sprouted into this thing, and I think the first record as a young band is always kind of the test, in my opinion, to see who's going to stick around.
Right.
And some bands, it's great, everybody sticks around and they keep going. But for us, we had that whole curse, which was bass player wants to go back to college, he gets married at 22, that thing, which is great. I'm happy for him.
Sure.
And as they say, we're still good friends.
Right.
And it allowed us to go look for another bass player. I saw Stephen Campbell playing with a group. I forget the name of it, but it's a funny band name.
Right.
And he was a friend of ours that was a guitar player, so I said, hey, man, you're about to go to college. He was going to Berkeley. I said, I'm going to need to take your bass player. So Stephen Campbell was in the group, and then Dean Mitchell joined about a year later on the saxophone. And as recently as a year ago, Deshaun Alexander joined on Hammond organ.
Right, right. So what do you look for when a player jumps out and you say that's the bass player for me or that's the keyboard player? What is it that is apparent to you?
I've always liked players that have their own thing, while at the same time reminding you of all these other players that you love.
Right.
Like a Stephen Campbell has like a really Jack Bruce kind of thing, but he never really dug on Jack Bruce the way that I did, so it's kind of odd that he would have that sound based off of the influences that he had.
Right.
Or Jack Ryan and I both had really similar influences, and then when we became roommates, like 6 years ago, and then we started swapping vinyl, and he turned me on to Rush, and I turned him on to like Otis Rush. So
Right.
we did like a swap.
Right. That's awesome. So once you have the band together, then the next step for a band these days is how do you reach the audience? How do you build that following? I know you've done a lot of touring, but are there other things that a band should be doing to really get themselves out there?
I think as much as you can, try to give an insight to how life is on the road for you, and just kind of stay well connected with your fan base.
Mm-hmm.
And we kind of came from playing in clubs or just bars in the corner somewhere.
Right.
So it was really difficult in some of those places, because I think everybody knows that the more you drink, the less your attention span can handle
Right.
something. So, we had to sneak a Mustang Sally in the middle of it to bring people in. And we still kind of do that thing with our own material now, which is we'll play like something that we'd have as like a single on the album, and then right after it sneak in like one of our more jazz compositions.
Right.
And we don't like to leave any space between songs. That's always kind of been our approach.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, just to keeping people, no dead air, keeping people interested.
Right. And are you working social media hard to drive that as well?
We try to do the best we can, and we've got people on our management that are better at it than us.
Right.
We're not very good promoters, and I think that's the strangest thing about a band coming up is the eternal struggle of the band and the club owner, which is the club owner's mad because people aren't coming in, and the band's upset because the club isn't promoting the show. Club's upset that you're not promoting the show, so it's kind of a odd thing because you have to kind of become a promoter, and you have to kind of become a driver. You know, you have to be all these things. You got to start booking yourself. I think at a certain point I had a false alias that I was using for emails, so people didn't think I was booking us.
Right.
Like some fake name.
Just so it wasn't you booking your own band.
And I was
right?
emailing people all the way in San Diego at the time, and, you know, they said no. But we'll be playing there on this next tour.
Well,
so
there you
that's
go.
Good.
There you go. It all works out. That's awesome. That's awesome. So one of the characteristics of your playing that really stands out to me, as opposed to many other players that I hear, is a lot of players have a kind of a nervousy, really fast vibrato that doesn't seem to settle in or really fit with the song. Your vibrato seems to be really dialed in to the mood of the song and the feel that you're going for. You have a lot of control over that. Is that something you worked on to achieve, or where did that come from?
Oh, well, first off, I appreciate that. My vibrato, I always tried to more so emulate like a violin or like a tenor saxophone.
Mm-hmm.
Because there was a really long time, still now really, I didn't really listen to many guitar players. Or slide players, their vibrato was something that I liked to try to emulate a little bit. But I listened more to like keyboard players and pedal steel players and vocalists and like Aretha Franklin's vibrato or Billie Holiday, somebody like that. That's what I was emulating, or like a violin, because I always hated the
right.
That never really did it for me.
Uh-huh.
So that's kind of where that came from.
Right. You've mentioned that before, that you look to horn players and in particular vocalists. You've mentioned Janis Joplin in the past as a vocalist that you've looked toward both for tone and for phrasing. Talk a little bit about that.
Well, the way that Janis would scream, it'd almost be like two notes, you know? Just these overtones that she was getting vocally. I wanted to apply that to guitar. And, you know, the tone helps a lot with that, so it depends on what you're playing through. And I can't go anywhere without reverb, you know?
Right.
But sometimes it is nice to just plug straight into a Marshall. There's that, too. But the polarity also helps with that vibrato we were talking about. And, but Janis, you know, you could hit a couple notes, almost like a tritone kind of thing, and with your vibrato you can accomplish that kind of screaming thing. Obviously it'll never sound like her.
Sure.
Nobody will ever sound like her, but that started to become my first influences vocally, was the people I was listening to and digging on as a guitar player. Then when I started singing, I kind of inadvertently surrounded myself music-wise with vocalists.
Right, and it appears you've taken that into the phrasing of your playing as well, the way a vocalist would breathe, or a horn player would breathe, because I hear increasing amounts of space in your playing. It's kind of opening. You're kind of opening that up a little bit with your phrasing. Is that coming from that vocal kind of a thing?
Absolutely. I try to breathe with my playing, and I think that's the most important thing that I continue to learn. Is the most valuable lesson I've ever gotten is knowing when to shut up.
Right. When you just leave a little bit of space, right? When that's dramatic. Right. So I have to ask, on the last record you had Derek Trucks and Warren Haynes, and Warren Haynes produced on that as well. Tell us a little bit about working with those two guys.
Oh man, well they're sweethearts, and everybody knows that. That's no secret. But Warren is such a wise person. And he doesn't give a lot of direct advice, but he gives a lot of, he tells a lot of stories, and from that you can soak up a lot of knowledge if you're listening, you know. Right. And on and off the stage, their conversations are very interesting. And they complement what you're saying very well. And I think that's a Southern charm thing too.
Yeah.
But I've met a lot of Northern folk with Southern charm as well, though.
Right.
You know, I think that's just a deep-rooted heart thing, and they're both really beautiful people. And we were really blessed to have Derek play on the track because he was only home for like a day, I think, before he went to Australia and something. And he said, "Send me the track, I'll play on it." So he did exactly what we needed to be done on it.
Right.
And it just sounded beautiful, and there it was. And Warren, you know, his playing actually, he's one of the first guys I listened to where I was like, the amount of space was what really blew me away. So that's the greatest compliment I ever got, was when he told me he liked what I didn't play.
Nice. Right. As a producer, was he hands-on? Did he start at the very early stages of writing, or was he in the studio with you, or how did that work?
So Warren is one of my favorite producers, because my favorite kind of producer is somebody that just, you know, knows when to take their finger off the button. And it goes back to knowing when to not speak.
Right.
You know, just like playing. And he would let us work things out amongst ourselves, because that's the chemistry of a group. You know, it's like a dogfight. You don't want to stick your hand in the middle of it sometime. But he had really great ideas as far as the arrangements, and like I said, bringing the horns in the right places, and just really phenomenal to work with.
Yeah, I imagine so. I saw a number of videos where you stepped on stage and sat in on songs. Purple Rain was one of them, and Jesus Just Left Chicago, and some incredible interplay and some great stuff going on there. Had to be a lot of fun.
Oh, it's always a trip.
Yeah.
Love playing with that guy.
Yeah, no doubt. Well, we're looking forward to the show tonight. Appreciate you taking time to come down this afternoon. I know you got sound check and stuff going on, so we appreciate you taking some time to sit down with us.
Yes, sir.
And congratulations on your career. We look forward to the new album as well.
Thanks a lot, Mitch.
Great to see you, Marcus.
Appreciate it.
And thank you for joining me for Sweetwater's Guitars and Gear. Be sure to tune in next time. We'll have more guitars, more amps, more effects. We'll be making lots of music. I'm Mitch Gallagher.